Hey everyone! So in my opinion, one of the most difficult parts of the game is understanding weapons. So whenever a weapon cache goes up, or a weapon wheel I guess is what you'll call it, it can be very difficult to know when it's a good time to actually pull on it, or if the weapons are worthwhile. Or even, if I do pull on it and I get the weapon I want, how do I use it? Now, the first weapon in this weapon wheel is pretty interesting. There's plus 30% attack, which is good for an offensive pistol, a medium bonus to AP when attacking, which can easily be replaced with a huge bonus to AP when attacking. Now, the third slot, Impair plus AP down. When attacking, a better chance to drain minus 20 AP from the enemy and impair for 3 turns. This is actually a blue weapon on a red weapon, which is pretty interesting. I always find it interesting when there's a mix-up between different types of abilities on weapons that are not usually on that specific trait weapon. It means it's a very special weapon, and it's not something that can be crafted. The last slot on this weapon gives plus 10% defense for every other alert teammate on the team. This can give up to plus 40% defense to all other teammates if you're running 5 red tunes on defense. Overall, I find this weapon to be very interesting because the 4th slot is a very defensive stat. The 3rd slot is kind of a mixture. It could be offensive or defensive, and then obviously the plus 30% attack. This is a very interesting weapon, and I believe you could build it a number of different ways, depending on if you are using it on defense or on offense, really. Because on offense, a better red weapon might be a splash weapon, for example, that can do a high amount of damage. And I know the weapon is called Secretary Gao's Violent Pistol, but this would actually work really well on Secretary Gao. I say that because he has a decently high attack stat already. His active skill is what you really want to use, the plus 60% AP gain. The bonus defense would help your offensive team stay alive, especially because most offensive tunes don't have a lot of defense or HP, so it would help mitigate the amount of damage actually taken. And then the 3rd slot would be good because on the first turn he still has to attack, so if he's able to impair the enemy, that just gives you a greater advantage. This next weapon is a weapon that I've talked about before. So Piper's Violent Pistol is a very offensive weapon. The 30% attack is huge for this weapon as a base stat. The plus 20% HP can be replaced with a huge bonus to AP when attacking. The 3rd slot is great for tunes that have a high attack power so that on basic attacks you can apply even more damage. And finally, the 4th slot, by increasing rush damage by 10%, this is the type of weapon that works perfectly with a tune like Krista, who has Waist Knot, or it could be used even on the Gentleman, who is a new tune that is coming to the game. Unfortunately, the Gentleman has a bound weapon, so you would need to make his weapon a 5-star weapon and then weapon swap. And then again, there are still better options, in my opinion, for a weapon for the Gentleman and even for Krista. This weapon is okay, but it's not great, in my opinion. The last weapon that we're going to be looking at is Ryan's Defensive Blunderbuss. This weapon, I think, is amazing. The plus 30% defense works really well with this defensive weapon. The focus point of this weapon is the focus stun, so when being attacked, a better chance to stun the enemy and get focus for 2 turns. So what focus does is that it lets you attack around human shields. It also prevents your tune from being impacted by confuse or taunt. This means you might not have to mod your tune with taunt resist or confuse resist, because you have the opportunity to both stun the enemy if they attack you, as well as focus your own tune. Now the last stat is pretty important. Being able to apply 10% bonus defense to all allies at the start of the turn is very effective. This type of weapon is perfect for a tune like Pete, in my opinion. Now, Pete also has a bound weapon, meaning you would have to 5-star it and then weapon swap this weapon onto Pete. But this weapon is super effective on almost any tune. It already has the base 30% defense. You can either go with AP as the 2nd slot, or you can go with more HP, for example. You can either use a very tanky build, or you can use one where you want your tune to rush. It really just comes down to your preference. But overall, this weapon is one of the best ones on the wheel, if not the best one. And when we look at the rest of the wheel, we see our typical normal stun weapon. We see our absolute defense axe, which is actually very effective. We have our impair weapon. for tough characters, our impair weapon. For fast characters, then there's 100,000 armory tokens. But that doesn't mean you will automatically get 100,000 armory tokens if you pull that. It means it could be anywhere from 1 to 100,000. And now you get into your other crafting items. And if you make 15 pulls, you have a 20% chance at getting varnish and an 80% chance at getting grease. The varnish is the really important part here. Everything else on this wheel, it's just additional optional parts that you can use for upgrading weapons or parts that are needed in order to upgrade weapons. So the most valuable thing here are those first 3 weapons, the armory tokens if you get a high amount, as well as the varnish, and I would say the blowtorches as well. Anyway, I hope you found this video to be informative, and I hope it helps you make a decision on if you're going to pull from this wheel or not.